have on global supply chains, of which Taiwan is an integral part. There is also another interesting observation from the study, and that is that despite Taiwanese national policy restricting this dependence on China, Taiwanese national policy has actually failed to regulate the economic relations with China, and it's actually Taiwanese enterprises who have circumvented official rules to reach this level of economic integration. What are the caveats? The increasing movement in the past 5 years, it has increasingly been said that apart from production itself, R&D is being moved to China. However, there are some scholars who contest that. They would say that research, which is creation of original knowledge, is being maintained in Taiwan, but development, which is like application of existing knowledge for commercial purposes, that is being moved to China. However, there are increasing fears that the more the R&D operations move to China, there could be spillover effects. The gap between the invested nation and the home country could actually be narrowed in the long run due to these spillover effects and learning by doing effects. So that is one caveat. Secondly, China, again in the past few years, has been trying to temper the high rates of economic growth it's witnessing, ostensibly to maintain equity within society. This has meant that some of the incentives that it extends, especially in early 2008, a lot of incentives, tax incentives, were withdrawn to foreign enterprises. This has meant that Taiwanese companies are now increasingly starting to recruit Chinese managers in supervisory capacities. Now, this is again a worrying trend because of the same reasons that learning by doing and imitation would ultimately narrow the gap that Taiwanese companies have had over Chinese production enterprises. The limitations of this study needs to be backed with more fieldwork-based survey on what is the kind of investment-driven trade when notebook computers and semiconductors move to the mainland. What is the kind of investment-driven trade that Taiwan is able to provide in terms of inputs? As of now, it is known that 1/3 of all inputs required by Taiwanese companies in China is actually sourced from Taiwan, but this is something I need to delve further into. The second aspect I see as a limitation is that there is a need to further study the net effect on domestic employment, especially the sectors within the service industry, which have actually absorbed a lot of the manufacturing workers into the services sector. Thank you.
Questions? We have time for questions. Yes.
I'm really interested in the way that the investment has been flowing from these flagship companies, which are mainly US companies, to Taiwan. And from there, that it has been again from Taiwan, and moving to China. So why is this trend seen there? Like, why is it not staying in Taiwan itself? And another thing is, like, why is it going through Taiwan and not direct to China? Have you also studied some?
Right. This is a very interesting question. The vulnerability aspect that I saw for Taiwan does not emerge from China. Actually, the vulnerability emerges from these flagship companies, which have been able to actually drive down prices. If you have noted, the price of laptop computers has on an average come down from $1,200 to roughly $600 to $700. And this is singularly being done by the flagship companies, which are cutting down on the margin. What happens is that it is not actually the investment which goes to Taiwan, and then from Taiwan they voluntarily move to the mainland. After 1987, the reason why China became an engine of regional economic growth is that a lot of these incentives which were offered by these provinces in China, because provinces have a lot of flexibility in negotiating arrangements with foreign invested enterprises. A lot of these areas attracted a lot of foreign investment. Now, Taiwanese companies, again, this was the period, you should remember, after the Plaza Accord. This was also the period where the domestic costs of hiring labor in Taiwan were extremely high because of the devaluation of the currency following the Plaza Accord. Taiwanese companies at that time had to move to the mainland simply to take advantage of cheap labor, because essentially in the initial years, the low end of manufacturing moved out of Taiwan. It was not the high end of manufacturing. PC, desktop computers, they started moving after 95. After 2001, notebook computers and mobile phones, they started moving. So what happens is, it is the brand names which are actually creating vulnerability for Taiwanese companies. which have actually relocated their production facility based on the cost factor.
More questions?
I found your fact really interesting when you said there hasn't been any direct conflict with Taiwan politically because they have a huge business tie relationship. So, is it? Am I supposed to infer that because of a huge investment that comes from Taiwan, China is not really interested in using Taiwan as a territory, but irrespective of the fact that losing a territory would also mean an impact in the national prestige. So is China also interested in keeping Taiwan as a part of a territory, just also for the sake of business?
That is exactly what the liberal interdependent school in international relations argues. That it argues that when the level of integration in economies is so high, that would reduce the possibility of any sort of armed attack, because that kind of damages both economies to such an extent that is not a feasible option which is chosen. However, China's claims on Taiwan, they remain irredentist. As per law, they have the right to use force. Militarily, they have come close to conflict on several occasions, 95, 96, 98, before 2000. Then you had the anti-secession law. But these are political developments, military developments. But what interested me to take up this topic was that there was not a single instance of financial coercion, and which is what made me look into the kind of investment patterns that actually move from Taiwan to China and the kind of role that Taiwanese companies play as far as driving the Chinese economy is concerned.
I have one question that the Taiwanese investment in China has transformed these days to other Southeast countries such as Vietnam because of the low labor cost there, and what do you think about this phenomenon? And also, you know that China and Taiwan has launched a direct flight these days. And do you think the trade volume will increase or just negatively affected by the financial crisis these days?
Right. It was very predictable. I'll take the second question first. It was very predictable if Mindshore wins, if the KMT comes to power, direct flights were going to be resumed. Because as long as Chen Shui-bian was there, he was always against furthering this sort of dependence on China. But Mindshore, he fought elections on a completely different platform. Would that lead to greater integration? Well, definitely, because a lot of this investment, which is routed through intermediate zones, would now be able to travel directly. Would that incentivize Taiwanese entrepreneurs to move to the mainland? Definitely. Reduction in flight hours. On an average, they will save 12 hours of journey, 6 hours back and forth. Each entrepreneur would save, so the number of flight hours saved would actually incentivize more investment to move to China. So yes, trade and commerce and investment would definitely move up. Again, the movement to Vietnam, that's actually a very interesting phenomenon, and that's been in operation only for the past few years. And many argue that the consistent push given by the DPP to Taiwanese investors to actually go south, go to other economies within the region. Vietnam was the first instance where a lot of Taiwanese entrepreneurs decided to shift production. But what has happened is, it's only the low-tech segment which is now moving to Vietnam on an experimental basis. So some of the Taiwanese companies, which are the world's largest shoe manufacturers, I mean, if you see this segment as well, this segment has increasingly experimented with a shift to Vietnam. So not many people are aware, but brand names like Nike as well, they outsource production of shoes to Taiwanese companies. So this is the segment which is now experimenting with the Go South policy. If that succeeds, that's good for Taiwan.
Any final questions here? The last word? Thank you very much. Okay, we only have 2 speakers today, but 2 very good speakers. So, Ji and Kim, and we're talking about.